This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, Stan Connally of Southern Company on how the electrification of America is pushing a historic demand for electricity and new generating facilities.
Think about this, not since the invention of the air conditioner have we seen such a potential impact to the electric loads for our utilities. In 2018, there were 1 million electric vehicles on the road. We're predicting by 2030 there'll be close to 19 million.
Good day and welcome to the 561st in our series of distinguished speaker programs. I'm Harvey Bennett for the Economic Club of Florida. We're very pleased to have with us today one of the leaders of one of the largest energy producers in the country. Stan Connally is Executive Vice President of Operations at Southern Company, based in Atlanta. He's also Chairman, President, and CEO of its Southern Company Services subsidiary. Stan, welcome.
Harvey, thank you. Boy, I'm looking forward to being with the group today. It's an honor to be able to come speak on something that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's energy.
Well, you're certainly joining us at a time of rapid transformation in the energy industry, including, I'm sure, many challenges.
Absolutely. Look, let's recognize the immediate past challenge Florida had with a terrible hurricane that the electric utilities needed to work through. That's an example of the many challenges we have day in and day out in our industry. But look, even bigger than that, thinking about supply chain, thinking about investment in our grid for the future, thinking about attracting and hiring the talent we need to lead us into the future. Those are a number of the challenges, but I think we'll rise to the challenges in industry, and I'm confident in our company's ability to do the same.
Of course, for consumers, that transformation in the energy industry is bringing higher costs, at least right now. Are those largely costs of input?
They really are, and you think about what's going on globally, not just here in the United States or in the Southeast or even here in Florida. You think about the supply chain challenges we've had really since the beginning of the pandemic, but it's certainly been accentuated since the war in Ukraine began. The ability to move parts, pieces, and equipment across the globe has become more challenging. Fuel costs have risen, and certainly we're seeing the energy challenges of Europe right now based on their dependence on Russian gas for so long. That has its own effects on the global supply and costs for natural gas as an example. So those inputs all around, all across our industry are rising. We're working really hard to manage through that, to keep our prices low for our consumers, but we are in a period of elevated prices. We're just going to have to work through it together.
Stan, you've been in the energy business all of your career, including with Georgia Power and then Gulf Power, which served parts of Florida. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how it's impacted your life journey.
Well, look, I gained an interest in the energy industry as a cooperative student at Georgia Tech. My first real job in business was working for the power company. And over the course of 34 years now, as my wife, Amy, and 2 boys have moved across the industry, moved 8 times across 4 states, just found this incredible connection with how meaningfully the product we have is used and appreciated by our communities and our customers. And you know, I say this often, energy is not a commodity, it's a necessity. Sometimes we think short term, sometimes we think about how we can make short term decisions to maybe deal with a price issue or a reliability issue. I think we have to think long term. And I get really excited about being in an industry where we're thinking long term about new technology, making big investment decisions that'll last 40, 60, 80 years. It's really fun for me. And to see customers be able to grow their homes and businesses because of a product I get to produce and deliver, it's a real purpose. It's a real connection to purpose for me, and I think it is for the many men and women in this industry.
That's terrific. Well, we won't spoil anything more about your upcoming address. Stan Connally, Executive VP of Operations at Southern Company and Chairman, President, and CEO of its Southern Company Services subsidiary. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, here's the immediate past chairman of the club, Bill Moore, President of Capital City Trust Company, with our formal introduction.
Stan asked me to be brief, and he saw my notes and said, please don't read that. There is information that's in your flyer, but there's some important information, I believe, that is that y'all would like to know more about Stan other than what's in the flyer. As Executive Vice President of Operations at Southern Company, Stan Connally oversees Southern Company's system-wide operations based in Birmingham, Alabama. This includes generation, transmission, engineering and construction services, commercial operations, supply chain management, system planning, and environmental affairs, as well as Southern Wholesale Energy and the company's Southern Link and Southern Telecom telecommunication businesses. As CEO of Southern Company Services, Connally is responsible for the primary shared services activities, administrative functions, and budget management for Southern Company Services. He is responsible for ensuring the alignment of information technology and operations functions to create strategies that deliver increased value to customers. Stan was Vice Chair of Enterprise Florida, the state's public-private partnership for economic development. He served on the Florida Chamber of Commerce Board as Chair of the Policy Council and sat on the Florida Council of 100 Board. He's been a member of the External Advisory Board of Georgia Tech Woodruff School of Mechanical Engineering. Stan Connally is chairman of the Electric Power Research Institute Board of Directors. He's been a member of that board since 2017, serving on the Executive Committee and the Compensation and Leadership Development Committees. He is the lead independent director of Capital City Bank Group's board. He serves on its audit committee and is immediate past chair of the governance and nominating committees. Connally currently serves on the Georgia Tech Advisory Board, which provides strategic vision and counsel for the Institute's president and senior leadership, and is a member of the National Association of Manufacturers Board. Stan earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology. He's hanging around this weekend. He has completed the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and National Academy for Nuclear Training's Reactor Technology course for utility executives. He has also completed the Gorizetta Executive Education Program at Emory and the Southern Company Senior Leadership Development Program. He's a native of Noonan, Georgia. Stan and his wife, Amy, have 2 sons, Cade and Court. We welcome Stan Connally.
Well, good morning. He read it after all. I appreciate that. Look, it is wonderful to be with you. I am going to hang around for the weekend. I think Georgia Tech may be your antidote for a 3-game losing streak. We'll see how this goes. But I'm going to commit to stay through halftime, Bill. I'm not sure how this is going to go, given the last few games we've played. But look, it's really kind of good to be home in some ways for me. I look across this audience and I see people I got to work with during my days here in Florida. I was in Northwest Florida for 6 years, still have a son in Northwest Florida. So my wife and I call the Panhandle home in a lot of ways. And I've always considered Tallahassee kind of an extension of that Panhandle. And so it's been good to get here. I've got a couple of days with Bill, and it's just an honor to be here. I got to say, though, it's one of the first times, we got a gentleman from the Public Service Commission in the back, first time I've had the opportunity to speak freely in front of an official from the commission when there wasn't some sort of ex parte thing going on. So we'll see how that goes. Hey, really, thank you. And to our veterans, I think it was very appropriate we recognize Ben. I'm sure there's other veterans in the room. That special day is coming up in a couple of weeks when we honor our veterans, November the 11th. And our company, Southern Company, like many in our industry, really depends on veterans to keep the lights on and the gas flowing. This year alone, we're going to hire 200 more veterans coming to work with us. And it's a really big deal. Ben, thank you for your service. I was preparing to come down, sitting in the living room with my wife last night, and she's much my same friend, my best friend, as Paula described Bill. And she said, "Where are you going tomorrow?" "I'm going down to Tallahassee." She knows I come down for board meetings with Capital City. And I was telling her about coming here. And she said, "Well, that's great. What are you going to talk about? Who do they normally have come?" And I was going through the website, looking at the list of past speakers. And it's admirals and ambassadors, it's generals and governors, it's economists and banking leaders. It's a pretty illustrious list. And I was kind of calling that out to my wife, Amy, and she said, well, why did they invite you, I said, the only thing I can come up with is I did come over and help turn the lights back on. One storm back in 2016 or 17, which Hermine, some of you probably remember that one. I had the honor of coming over and working alongside the city of Tallahassee to get the lights back on. And as I think about the energy industry, that notion of keeping the lights on and the gas flowing really is the core of what we do. The title for today's conversation about building a cleaner and more resilient future, that's all true. But when I wrap up today, I want to come back and really center back on some pretty simple things. There is a lot going on in our business. There's a lot going on in the world related to energy. I appreciated the reference to the bills going up because ours are too. Look, it's a really interesting time to be in this business. And look, I'm a little passionate about that. I've been doing this for 34 years now, all at Southern Company, all across the Southeast. Obviously, I've gotten involved in a few things industry-wide now, and that brings some new perspective on policy and how things are done elsewhere in our country. And in my comments today, I want to compliment your state. Much like the states I get to serve at Southern Company, I think energy policy is done right. And I'll dive into that a little bit more. And while there's always things we at Southern Company and your utilities here in the state of Florida can do to be better, there's always those things. I got to tell you, compared to other places around the world today who don't have the energy they need to stay warm across winter, our system of serving customers does work in a lot of ways. But look, thinking about the mission of your club, trying to come in to talk about important and relevant topics, I hope it wasn't too important to you that I hope your lights came on this morning when you got up, right? Most folks don't think about us until the bill comes or the lights aren't working. Now, some days that's a fortunate place to be. But in today's world, there's so much changing in the energy industry, it's hard not to think about what we do, and in a bigger way, how energy is changing. If you think about how you depend on energy every day, and think about the changes going on all around us in the energy complex, and let me highlight a few. Just here in your state, we've already made reference to Hurricane Ian. I need to compliment the utilities in this state for the incredible effort they put into getting the lights back on after a really, really tough storm. I was talking with Jeff earlier. I know TECO was impacted, FP&L, a lot of the cooperatives downstate. I think we have a mutual assistance network in the energy industry where the host utilities, be it your companies, your utility or otherwise, they can call on companies that weren't impacted. And there were over 30,000 men and women that came from some 30 other states into this state to help get the lights back on after Ian. That's not the first time that's happened, but let me just tell you, it's a heroic effort by those men and women to do that. And I want to compliment your utilities in your state. They did an excellent job. And, frankly, they've got some practice. We all do, right? But I can tell you, across the country, that mutual assistance effort in the state of Florida is one that many try to model. I had the pleasure of being a part of that at Gulf Power Company, and we do the same at Southern. But you need to feel good about the effort your state utilities put in and the cooperatives and municipals in getting the lights back on when you need it most. It was well done. So look, it's relevant in that sense. It's relevant nationally. We've made mention of energy prices rising, and it depends on where you are in the country and what markets you may be in or your utility, where that is. But I would tell you generally across our country, prices are coming up some. There's some dynamics around natural gas prices and other commodities related to supply chain that are really leading to a lot of those pressures. And we're all working incredibly hard to try to manage that. But much like many of your businesses, I'm sure supply chain has not gotten any easier. First the pandemic, now international challenges. I think that supply chain, I want to say malaise in some ways, but the real challenges around that are going to last a little while. I'd like to give you some hope there, but as long as we have this conflict in Europe going on, I think there's going to be some challenges to supply chain fixing itself for some time. But look, politically, the energy business, we've gotten a few wins in the last 6 to 12 months. Some wins in regard to helping us transition to the future. The Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act IAJA, I think was the acronym, included a number of opportunities for companies like mine or communities or states to try to move their energy network forward. Some opportunities to invest in our transmission and distribution networks in greater ways, opportunities to invest in electric vehicle infrastructure, and opportunities to help those that need it most with some energy efficiency grants. There's some real opportunities in there for our industry and you as customers and you as the Tallahassee community to take advantage of those. And so that's something great that's happened. We'll see how all that plays out in the coming months. And as well, you can decide whether it's aptly named the Inflation Reduction Act, included a number of tax incentives focused primarily on renewables, extensions of those tax credits, but also some tax credits related to nuclear energy development, as well as storage development and a number of other energy-related opportunities for us to continue moving forward. So, look, politically, energy should not be a partisan issue. It just should not be. Now, I know you're a bipartisan club and you understand what that looks like. Unfortunately, there's way too much partisanship going on related to energy, because at the end of the day, it is not a commodity, it is a necessity. And just ask the citizens of Texas 2 winters ago, when they didn't have it for several days in sub-zero weather. You learned then it is really a necessity, not a commodity. And I think our country needs to come together, both sides of the aisle need to come together to continue helping us move forward related to energy policy. That's hard. It really is hard, and there's a lot of deep-rooted opinions on either side, but I got to tell you, we got to keep working on that together, whether it's at the federal level, at the state level. Energy is something everyone needs. We need to make it better, and that's part of what we're doing moving forward to make it cleaner and more resilient. Look, the other dynamic none of us saw coming probably 12 months ago is the war in Europe. It has absolutely affected the supply chain of a number of materials that our energy uses. We've seen now that the Russians will use energy as a weapon. I'm really concerned about Europe this winter and how they're going to navigate through the lack of the energy they previously received from Russia. I think it's a pretty important thing for us to learn from. We don't need to become too dependent on one source or one supplier. But look, that's spun into issues here in the United States as well. We have this thing called liquefied natural gas. Many of you have heard of LNG. There's a number of terminals across the Atlantic seaboard in the Gulf of Mexico, and some potentially being developed on the West Coast, where you compress natural gas at really cold temperatures. You can put it in a vessel. It looks like a liquid, and you can ship it in these containers overseas. The maximum amount that can leave our country is leaving right now. The amount we burn every year at Southern Company, an equivalent, is leaving and going to Europe right now. And so, look, the gas prices in Europe, you can certainly understand from a free market perspective. They're following the dollars. They're following the opportunity to sell that at better prices. But it also has led to a shortage of supply in some cases, shorter than normal in the United States. So when you hear natural gas prices being elevated, that's at least a piece of it. And it comes right back to many of your bills, because you're either using natural gas for heating, cooking, water heating, whatever it might be, or the electricity that you're using is being produced in some cases through natural gas. So look, electricity is no longer just a local thing to think about. You have to think about worldwide issues when we think about how we move forward here together. And so, look, clearly there's some complexities around all that, but I was telling somebody in the last couple of days, I've never had more fun in my career than right now. Now, it may sound weird. I'm in my 34th year. I've had great opportunities, as you've heard here, and the challenges are real, and change is right here in front of us. But I've never had more fun trying to think about the future. And yes, there's some complexities. I mean, technology is a complexity. The trustees, some of them were asking me about new technologies. I'm going to mention renewables again here in just a moment. Technology development is right in front of us. We're putting it into use. But boy, more technology and development needs to happen. That's why I'm so committed to the industry's research group. You heard Bill mention it, the Electric Power Research Institute. Many of the technologies we're using to provide you to make, move, and sell energy today didn't exist 20 years ago. Now, they may have existed on paper, but to turn a solar panel into an economic source that really has only evolved in the last 20 years. I think forward 20 years from now, as we're all trying to become cleaner, even more resilient, the technologies that my kids may help lead and deploy, your grandsons, granddaughters, kids may help and deploy, the ones that right here at Florida State University are going to try to develop, some of those technologies haven't even been put to commercial use yet. And that gets me excited about thinking about the future and leading that. And my company, Southern Company, has long remained a leader in energy research and development. Many of our peers really have kind of gotten out of the business of doing that and letting somebody else do it. We just think, number one, we need to learn how to run and operate these pieces of equipment before we put them into service. But number two, when we're talking to policymakers about what's possible and the pace of what's possible, I sure do like having the credibility of saying we have tried it, we helped design it, we understand it. And I think we're going to remain committed to the R&D that needs to happen. Look, customers are changing. You're changing. I say this sort of generically, but I think what customers want is convenience, customization, and control. Now, that looks a little different to every consumer, right? But you probably want that in other forms of things you buy: convenience, customization, and control. No longer will it work for us just to send an electron to your meter. I think you need us for energy efficiency advice. I think you need to help us. You need our help figuring out how to use your energy across different hours of the day. I think you need our help understanding how you might take new electro technologies into your home or your business, electric vehicles being an example of that. And so I think as a company and as an industry, the more we can focus on satisfying that customer right where they are, and that is evolving every day and changing every day, the better off we're going to be long term. And now more than ever, we used to kind of classify our customers in three groups: residential, commercial, and industrial. Boy, you just can't do that anymore. Every residential customer is different and is looking for something tailored and customized to them. So that's a part of the changes we're trying to evolve through. Look, cyber is another issue. Cyber threats. I got to tell you, when we I guess saw that the war in Ukraine was imminent, there was a great deal of concern at the U.S. government level, at our companies, that we would start seeing attacks on the energy industry in the United States, because we knew they would also be attacking the same in the Ukraine. And look, there have been attacks. There have been a number of cyber attacks across the energy complex. In fact, frankly, we get attacked hundreds of thousands of times a day. We have to have new systems to catch those things. And I can tell you right now more than ever, that's why I do have some optimism about our federal government working with private industry. Now more than ever, more than I've ever seen in my career, we have real-time dialogue that's happening between the federal government on what they see in the threat landscape around cyber and what we're seeing in the threat landscape. When we have an issue, we tell them immediately. When they see a threat, they tell us immediately, so we can prepare, respond, and mitigate. I got to tell you, that's probably one of the better things working for our industry right now, is working with the cyber agencies of America, Department of Energy. That's an area where you should feel optimistic that while we'll never protect ourselves completely, there's more attention and collaboration on cyber protection for the electric utility, gas utility, oil industry today than there has ever been. Colonial Pipeline taught us some lessons, though. Many of you might remember that from a couple of years ago. They got in, and we're having to redesign some things based on those learnings. So that's where I come back to, you can never say never in this world, but managing cyber threats is real. Look, talent is another one. When I came to work for Southern Company 34 years ago, it was sort of understood you were there whenever the power company needed you. And we do have a 24/7 business that we operate, and I think you all understand that. Today's young person coming to work has a little different attitude about some of that. But here's what I found. I haven't given up hope, because after 2 or 3 years of being connected to the purpose of serving customers, and nothing works better than asking those young people to go work a storm, like I described earlier, you suddenly have this feeling of mission. And it's not as honorable as our armed services by any stretch of the imagination, but when you can restore hope to a community that's been hit by a hurricane like Ian was 2 weeks ago, it sort of changes your level of commitment. I've been doing that for 34 years now. I'm sort of over it. But I'm enjoying teaching the new men and women that come to work with us the value of connecting to that purpose and why it's so important for you to connect to the customer and what they need most. So I'm optimistic about talent. Yeah, it's changing. Yeah, they learn differently than I did. There's people in this room that learn differently than I did. But at the end of the day, the mission of connecting with customers and connecting to that purpose is a place we're finding we can continue to attract some of the best. And I'm optimistic but for that and for the reasons I described earlier. We're finding men and women in the armed services that want to come work in an industry that's got very similar values. And so that's another challenge, although I think we're managing it. Let me transition quickly. There's 4 areas I just wanted to touch on quickly, and then I'll wrap up. These are, as we think about building the future of energy and making it cleaner and more resilient, these are 4 areas that I spend a good bit of time on in my piece of the business, the operations arena. First one is a lower carbon future. You may have individual beliefs about climate change and climate science, but clearly the climate is changing. Let's don't debate why. Let's just acknowledge it's changing. It's bringing more intense storms, more frequent storms. It's bringing droughts and wildfires to the west of the United States. It's bringing really extremes of cold weather to Texas and Louisiana that we hadn't seen before. So something's changing, and we've got to prepare for it. Now, along the way, what we have found is decarbonizing our electric generation business, frankly, has proved economic for our consumers. Thus far, we have transitioned our fleet. We've actually retired or converted 80% or so of our generating units across Southern Company in the last 15 or so years. We've brought carbon emissions down to nearly 50%, and we're on a mission to get what people refer to as net zero by 2050. The hard part comes in the next half of the percentage. Getting to this 50% hadn't been easy, and it's required us to redeploy capital, redeploy technologies. But really kind of getting that last 10 to 20% is going to be the hard part. That's where the new technologies have to evolve. We're deploying solar and storage technologies today. We're the only company in the industry that is building new nuclear, and I'm happy to have the debate with you about nuclear. It has to be a reasonable part of a clean energy future for our country. We have let it go away. We've lost a generation of talent. My alma mater lost a school. They didn't even have a nuclear engineering school 10 years ago. They let it go away. We're back. I was talking to GE this week, who has a new nuclear technology. They're hiring hundreds of new nuclear engineers. I just got to tell you that to ensure we can keep the lights on around the clock, nuclear has to be a part of that. And we loaded fuel in the first new nuclear unit in over 30 years last week. And in the coming weeks, we hope to start that unit up and produce around-the-clock carbon-free energy for our customers. So decarbonization is a big deal. Look, natural gas is going to be a continued part of this. I think there's some communities around our country that are wanting to ban natural gas in their homes and businesses. Maybe there will come a day when we find an acceptable replacement for natural gas. And by the way, it's much cleaner than some of the other fuels we've used in the past. Until we can figure some of that out, though, natural gas isn't just a bridge fuel. It isn't just going to take us up through the next few years. We're going to be using natural gas for the next few decades. And from an energy security perspective, I hope you would at least agree we've got a bunch of it in the ground in the United States. We ought to be using it the right way. Cleaner every day, but it has been, and I think will return to being a very economic fuel for our country. So lower carbon future is a big piece of the work we do. Another one is electrification. Anybody here drive an EV to the meeting today? Got at least one. It's growing. You're not going to be the only one next time, I bet. We've got, you think about electrification. We don't need to electrify everything. I think that word has gotten a little misused at times. But look, there is a place for electric vehicles. There's a place for other alternative fuel vehicles. Many of our customers are coming to us today asking how we can help them turn their technologies into electric technologies where they can be cleaner as well. But I really do believe electric vehicles is really going to get the most attention. In the infrastructure bill I mentioned, there's billions of dollars for electric vehicle infrastructure and charging. We're excited about that. But think about this. Not since the invention of the air conditioner have we seen such a potential impact to the electric loads for our utilities. In 2018, there were 1 million electric vehicles on the road. We're predicting by 2030 there'll be close to 19 million electric vehicles on the road. Most of the automakers have made a commitment to transition their fleets. So electrification and how we plan for that, how we enable that, really is a big piece of what we're trying to do to build that future. Look, solutions in the future won't, the wires may look the same, but the energy that's put on those wires is going to be very, very different. I've already talked about renewables and whatnot. 20 years ago, most of the electricity that was produced in these big central station power plants. I ran a few of them. I mean, they're huge. Going forward, I think the day of the big central station power production facility is going to evolve, and it's going to be far more distributed. I mean, just look at your airport. When I came in today, and you've got solar panels in just about every direction out there, and I'm sure it's performing well for you and for the utility here. You're going to see more of that all across our country. There'll be smaller installations. They won't look like the generating plants of the future. That brings new challenges, though. It brings permitting challenges. It brings land use challenges. And how we navigate through some of those, I think, is sort of the new evolution in the permitting side of things that we as a country need to get more efficient at. Our permitting system in the United States at the federal level needs a lot of work, and we'll continue to try to influence that. The last thing I would add is just being more resilient, and I'll throw a compliment to this state in the investments made by the utilities in this state and with the support of the Public Service Commission to invest in resiliency. What is resiliency? Reliability to me is the work we do and the performance of our system to keep the lights on a normal day. Resiliency is how we withstand the extremes, like a hurricane or a thunderstorm. And more, your utilities here in this state are surviving those events and able to get the lights back on quicker because of the investments they've made and the support they've got out of your Public Service Commission. As a country, we've got to keep doing more of that. I think we need to acknowledge those extremes are real. They may grow in frequency and intensity, and investing in resiliency on our power grids is an area that I think we've got to continue working on. It's an area of the business that I've got responsibility for, and we're going to keep working on here at Southern Company. So look, a lot of complexities, a lot of reshaping of how we make, move, and sell. There's a lot of pressures right here in front of us. But I try to do this for the men and women at Southern. I think you do have to come back and make some of this simple. And there's some simple principles that I believe in, and I know some of my colleagues in the utility business here believe in also because I've worked alongside them. But look, I think they may apply to your businesses and your life as well. Let me share just a few as I wrap up here. I've just kind of referred to these as some simple truths. Keep the customer at the center of everything you do. We at Capital City refer to them as clients. You may have your own name for them. Keep the customer at the center of the conversation. There's so many things we can talk about as I have today, but it all comes back to the consumer and what they need and how we can serve them best. When we serve them best, we get fair treatment from a regulator. When we serve them best, we get to invest more in our business and benefit our shareholders. Keep the customer at the center of everything you do. Secondly, and I said this an awful lot in Northwest Florida, when our communities are healthy, we will be healthy. That looks like jobs. That looks like education. That looks like dealing with poverty. And I think our businesses are very in tune to that. And we as an industry have to stay connected to what's best for the community. That's why you see folks like TECO involved in economic development. That's why you see Florida Power and Light involved in economic development, because it's good for the communities. Now, yes, we get to grow out of that, but at the heart of it, if people aren't employed in those communities, I can promise you it's going to be harder for them to pay their bills with us. And the community spirals when those kinds of things happen. Okay, so when the community's healthy, you will be healthy. Third, and I've referred to this, and it's another place I'm going to compliment your state, balancing all these things is important. It's so easy to get focused on clean. And there's regions of our country that have built their model, their energy delivery model purely around clean. There's other regions of the country that have built it purely around affordability. There's markets, I'll just name one, Texas, that has a market that really has for years focused on just trying to drive the price down of electricity. But look, if you don't balance safe, clean, reliable, affordable, one of those is going to get out of whack. And over 34 years, I've seen industry peers of mine get it out of whack. And I've said earlier, we're not perfect. There's always puts and takes on each one of those. But to have a state policy body like your Public Service Commission, that, and look, I'm biased. I was here for 6 years. I was in front of them several times. They were fair. They were tough, but they were fair. And they tried to help us keep that in balance. And I think you should always advocate for that too. Fourth one, quickly. This is a long-term business we're in. We cannot go with the temptation to think short-term in our industry. The investments my company's making and the companies around you are making, whether it's gas, oil, electric, you name it, these are 40-year investments. We could chase fads. We could chase technologies that have a marginal opportunity to serve us. I just got to tell you, while I want to watch the technology, I think we've got to be focused on the long term. The current rise in supply chain prices and fuel prices will pass. We've got to weather our way through it, keep our eye on the long term. I think that's important for our industry. And lastly, and I'll close here, and I sort of opened with this a little bit when I was talking about the heroic effort of the men and women in South Florida during that storm. I'm convinced we're better together. Welcome to the industry. We've got a new TICO teammate here. I didn't get a chance to work with her when I was here, but I knew a lot of the folks in this state and I know a lot of folks in this industry. We all have our share owners to satisfy. We all have our state policymakers to satisfy. We all have our local communities and customer groups that we're so focused on. But there are a lot of days in our industry when we're just better together. And as I go around our country talking about that with policymakers, there's such a temptation to pick one off here and do something that they think's bad for them. Look, this stuff bleeds over into other parts of our industry. And when the call comes to come help get the lights back on in South Florida, I'm in. I'm in. Because one day I'm going to need them in Mobile, Alabama. One day I'm going to need them in Atlanta, Georgia. And I think we've got to keep that spirit of cooperation going to make sure we do this right. This energy transition is going to take a while. We're well down the path. But I think we're better together when we can think forward and keep that customer at the center. So with that, I'll be quiet. Maybe that was something that was of interest to you about the transition we're going through. I'm happy to try to answer a few questions.
All right, now our favorite moment is asking questions. There's a microphone in the center. One by one, Stan's going to answer a few questions.
Thank you so much. That was incredible information that we need to know about. And thanks for your optimistic views of how to handle it. The question I have is, as we see, as you indicated, that the auto and the vehicle companies are going to be converting to electrified vehicles. The demand will go up significantly among individuals as well as companies converting their fleets to electrified vehicles. We have all the charging stations that will now be able to be placed around the country with the infrastructure bill. What is the capacity of the industry to be able to meet what appears to be a seriously heavy demand? All of us in our garages recharging our cars or going around the country, are we able to produce the supply to meet the demand?
Yes, sir. Great question. And I'm going to remain optimistic. I can tell you in the near term, I'm very confident about it. Now I'll speak from my territory. So Southern Company's territory across 3 states. And you go to Atlanta, Georgia, which is where you might expect the greatest concentration of electric vehicles to be. We're learning as we go here. There's no doubt. It's just much like the adoption of air conditioning. It happened one at a time, right? But I can tell you, we have seen the growth in Atlanta come. We're learning more and more about some of the socioeconomic factors. Let's face it, not everyone can afford one right now. That's something else that needs to be solved. And so we're seeing it grow today and maybe in the more affluent communities, but I think over time it goes to every community. And I'm really optimistic that we'll be able to just add them right on like they were adding a refrigerator, if you want to look at it that way. It's a new appliance at a home. Now, where it's even more interesting, though, if you take a FedEx or a UPS, a big fleet, Postal Service, you name it, If they decide they want to electrify their fleet, and many of those vehicles come back to the same place every night, then you've really got to think about how you redesign the network around that, because those loads really can overwhelm the local electric circuits. Thankfully, most of those companies have come to us ahead of time and said, look, we're getting ready to electrify our fleet. We've got time to upgrade the lines. So I'm really optimistic about it. I really am. I think the bigger concern, frankly, will be getting the electric charging infrastructure at the right places around our country. I really think we're kind of getting over what they refer to as range anxiety. We're getting there. We're not there yet. But we're a part of a consortium that's trying to build a network along the major corridors in the southeast and across our country. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, I think, to enable electric transportation. And I'm very optimistic we can handle the loads and the challenges that come with it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, Stan, Dave Micah. Welcome back to Florida and Tallahassee. And thanks for having the lights come on this morning. I appreciate that. I also wanted to just say, before I ask you my question, thank you also for the legacy of the people that your company has offered to Florida over the years. Some incredible individuals with the golf company and that former subsidiary of yours that just did great work.
Thank you.
Way beyond the expectations of what they do for the utility company, but in public service in so many arenas that I became familiar with. So thank you for that as well. And thanks for the return to your investors. I'm not one of them, but you know what? American commerce depends on companies like the Southern Company that people say. So thank you for that also. I wanted to dig into, in my question, a little bit more into the resiliency issue. I was an oil and gas guy for my whole career, but one of the things that always fascinated me on a personal level was underground utilities. I love them in my little neighborhood, but I knew just outside my neighborhood there was a line that was going to get knocked down that would knock mine out also. So for decades, I've read the studies on it and inquired, and always came up with the bottom line being the issue. It's costly. It's costly. It's costly. But Stan, America's changed. And you talked about the issues that we're facing going forward with bigger and greater storms and things like that. And I'm hoping that the Resiliency Council and your company and my local utility will put a greater emphasis on going more underground. Here in Tallahassee, what they're trying to do, it seems to me, is do that on new construction in new areas. But we've also got to go back to the resiliency of our core lines and things like that. Is your company in the transmission era looking at that and how are you looking at it going forward?
That's a really good question. And you used an important word right there at the end, and that's transmission. I want to differentiate the big wires from the little wires, okay? And that's, if you'll forgive me, I'm not trying to be condescending. Most folks don't understand the difference sometimes. Look, it's millions of dollars more per mile to put it underground. But just in the last 2 months, I've walked a neighborhood with one of our engineers who showed me how it can be done. And at Alabama Power, Georgia Power, primarily in the Atlanta area, more customers there, and in Mississippi, we do have a long-term resiliency strategy. It will take years to do this, to keep it affordable. But we have a long-term strategy to put more and more of our existing lines underground in support of that resiliency. Here's one of the things you got to balance, though. In certain places, and I would maybe pick some coastal areas, I think I could have a good debate with you whether or not it's better to put it underground. If you have a storm come in and wash an area, and you get salt water as an example in those systems, you basically have to replace the entire thing. You go to New York is another place we saw it happen with Superstorm Sandy. All that water rushed into New York City, went underground in these buildings. The electrical infrastructure had to be repaired. So there's a balance of all that. But absolutely, I think more and more, our company, and I think some of your companies here in this state have invested in those things. On the big wires now, I'll tell you it's even more of a challenge and it's more costly. But there's things you can do. And I'll compliment FP&L in this state. They said they didn't lose a single transmission tower during the storm that just happened. And that was a Category 4 storm at landfall, I think. Now, I haven't verified that and haven't talked to them directly. But to hear their conversation about the investments they made, I know TECO's doing that, Duke's doing that, others are. There's things we can do to engineer and design and install the big wire systems to make them be able to withstand those things and come back even faster. So absolutely, that's a piece of the resiliency. Yeah. Barney.
Thank you for your comments. 2 questions. Number one, you mentioned a little bit about nuclear power, and the challenge there is always seemed to be the residue that's left over. So to the extent that you're not talking about national secrets, can you share with us some? I think folks are doing some interesting things on what's left over from the nuclear power. Can you share a little bit what your vision is, your company's vision on that is with regard to nuclear power? And then
Sure.
Number 2, would you share with us a little bit your perspective and your company's perspective on energy being a national security issue?
Absolutely. Well, look, I'll start with the second one, Barney. Thank you for the question. Look no further than Europe right now to understand how energy is changing their economy. And look, frankly, I think it may change lives. I mean, if they have to endure the winter that could be ahead of them, having rolling blackouts just to conserve energy, I hate to sound this harsh, but people die. And so it is I said it already, it's a necessity, it's not a commodity. But energy security is something we've got to stay focused on. Whether it's how you produce it, how you store it, how you deliver it, because there's plenty of people, trust me, there's plenty of people that are natives of this country, they're Americans, that would like to do harm to the electric utility infrastructure. We spend a lot of time thinking about folks sitting in their basement with a computer trying to do harm overseas. It can happen right here. So we have to improve on the security measures. Cyber is involved in that, and so energy security is huge. Nuclear industry is hard too now. I don't want anybody to think I'm painting a rosy picture here. We're getting ready to wrap up a project that started some 15 years ago. And as an investor that I am, I'm a share owner, and I think we've got another one here, and I bet there's others here. You've read all too often about Southern Company's project going over budget and taking longer, okay? That's all true. But I think to lead us forward, we got to do some hard things. And we didn't mind leading on this one. And I got to tell you, we're going to get there. And much like the other units that we built in our footprint, who also were over cost and over schedule, 20 years later, we're sure glad we did them. Now, the fuel issue, the nuclear waste issue, is a real one. Today, we do not have a national repository to store spent nuclear fuel. There was a facility being built in Nevada. It's referred to as Yucca Mountain. That got killed during Harry Reid's term as Senate Majority Leader. It has not restarted, and frankly, I don't think it will restart. So today, at every nuclear power facility, or most nuclear power facilities, we have concrete casks where you take the spent fuel, you put it in there in a certain arrangement because there's still radioactivity going on, and you seal it in concrete forever. Now, I'm very confident in the integrity of those systems. I've seen them poured. I've seen how we do it. I know the engineering design behind that. That doesn't worry me. But here's an interesting point. There's still radioactivity left. And so the new generation of nuclear units in our country really is rethinking that. How can we take some of this spent nuclear fuel? It doesn't have the energy it once did, but how can we use it in the new generation of nuclear reactors? We refer to them as Generation 4. We're in Generation 3 right now, so we've still got to keep evolving the technology. I'm most optimistic about that. Because I said earlier, I still think we're going to need to build some more nuclear in our country. And I know where there's some fuel. And there's all sorts of issues with mining and permitting. We don't need to be relying on foreign countries to provide us with uranium when we've got some sitting here. So I think that's one way we can deal with it, but that's how we're doing it today, all across the industry.
Got time for one more question.
I don't know the details on this, but I've read before about there's a type of bomb that can be exploded, detonated, but without blowing anything up, but it would knock like the entire power grid out without, that's a different type of threat from the hackers. Can you address that? Is that a serious threat or?
You're going to let me get geeky today, aren't you? You're going to let me use a little this Georgia Tech that's left in me. Look, there are, if I understood you right, some refer to those as electromagnetic pulses. And the bomb, if you will, or device, however you want to look at it, that he's referring to, There's been some study about if one of those were to be detonated at a low atmosphere, it can send electromagnetic pulses through the atmosphere and can interfere with the electric systems that we own and operate. We've done a lot of study on that, and yes, it can happen. But the reports that it will be a widespread issue, I think, are overstated. And that's where I'll have to stop and not get specific, because all of our utilities around the country have studied their systems. We know which assets may have some exposure to that, and we're doing some things in those assets, around those assets, to protect them from electromagnetic pulses. So it sounds a little far-fetched, it sounds a little Star Trek, but yeah, it could happen. But look, some of that could happen naturally. You could have pulses from space, other things, yeah, that could cause some of that. The waveforms look different, but we're thinking about protecting our systems similarly.
You've been listening to Southern Company Executive Vice President Stan Connally, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on October 26, 2022 in Tallahassee, Florida. For more information on Southern Company, visit southerncompany.com. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com. This program was recorded at the Champions Club at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida.